Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Trevor. I'm here with Trevor Ewen, CEO, engineer, and partner of an acquisition fund. Man, thank you. I don't know why I can't ever get through the name part without stumbling just a little bit, but thank you for being here today. I always like to joke around and say, hey, you were born and then you ended up on a podcast about buying and selling businesses. Could you fill out the gap in between? So, how did you get started and how did you end up on an acquisitions and mergers podcast?
Sure. Well, I think I ended up here because you were great to reach out, and it was clearly a good fit. But I can talk about why it's a good fit, and that goes into some of my background. I guess the easiest way to put it is, entering the work world. I got into software engineering at a time when having a job was sometimes hard, right after the Great Recession, but also at a time that software engineering hadn't really hit its peak in the U.S. A lot of people thought, it's kind of a dying job here. It's all going to be offshore. And what happened is that became ever and ever more relevant to businesses. We saw a big uptick in both kind of rates, opportunity, but also just the rhetoric around people learning how to code. Around 2013 was when I started to hear a big difference around that. So it was really lucky in a way because I kind of stepped into a career that fit me, but also had a lot of tailwinds really that have been going in the last decade. And so, I think as an individual contributor and then eventually managing teams inside of a larger context, like a corporate context, eventually you say, what's next? And in 2021, my partner and I decided to break free from both of those contexts for ourselves. And so we have a dev firm, which is called Southport Technology Group, and then we have an acquisitions fund called Southport Ventures. And I think we see this kind of emerging software acquisitions market as a pretty exciting thing to do, and it matches our stage of life, kind of matches our temperament as well. So that's why I'm here.
And others think it's a great time to buy one because people just don't want to go through another. They'll be ready to get out.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and I think that will vary a lot with the kind of life stage of the seller,
yeah.
which is it's interesting, right? On one hand, in software, you deal with a younger seller set for sure compared to say Main Street businesses, business services, that kind of thing. But even so, we've found people they're not say ready to retire. Maybe that's a term they've reserved for 30 years away, but they are ready for something new. It's a bit of a grind. It's a bit of a slog. And one of the things that I think people underestimate about the kind of growthy market that we've just lived through is it's very taxing on people, right? So having to perform at that high level and having new entrants, well-funded new entrants, always enter your market can be a lot. So we're very focused on that. I mean, this is kind of a truism in the acquisitions world, but we've lived it out. As much as we didn't think it was always the case initially. Is okay. There's the financial reason you're selling, and then there's the non-financial reason, and we are going to have a much more interesting conversation if we can get to alignment on the non-financial reason. It's good. You have to go pretty wide for top of funnel. But we have been outperforming some of our initial estimates in terms of actual conversations. A lot of it is making sure that first call is really efficient to disqualify the business, which very often happens. And one of the best treats about it is that people who disqualify themselves early or who don't respond early, they still keep the email around. They'll keep it handy. And so sometimes, we've seen a few responses 9 months to 12 months after we sent the original email, which is always interesting because um, you almost assume in that situation you're dealing with someone who's a little bit more strategic about what they're doing because they have been actively thinking about this for some months at a time and not just quickly responding to you. For a lot of more legacy platforms, especially stuff that probably has been in operation since the early 90s and is ready for a bit of a rebrand or a change to the way the product is delivered, those things might actually be more susceptible to a direct mail campaign or something more traditional in that way. And I think you'll see that with Main Street businesses, as you just mentioned, real estate. So what I would say is, for people in your audience, anyone who's listening, if they're thinking about getting started on sourcing, don't think you have to match our exact process. I think it's just the way of thinking is good. Is where do my sellers live? How am I going to contact them where they live? How am I going to have an unfair advantage in finding them? And then how am I going to engage with them the moment I have them? And for us, it was simplistic, focus on our backgrounds, how we're very aligned with them, and then move to disqualification quickly.
Now it's time to onboard them. Now it's time to like you just recently acquired it. How, how how do you go about bringing them on board and integrating them in with all the other stuff you got going on?
Well, I think for us, we're definitely at a transition point because we are working on our largest deal right now, and so that will be new for us. So instead of speaking to that, because I can't say for certain what will happen. I mean, what this is going to do is it's going to end up becoming a bigger part of our whole Like it's just going to be everything is going to switch to orient around this larger star. It's the gravitational pull is big. This is not the narrative can often be like, oh, they're going to a low cost provider, and it's like this is actually a highly skilled provider that is cost competitive, right? Um, but for me, the number one thing isn't cost, and I know that's the case because we tend to recruit in Latin America because we want that time zone overlap, and those aren't the cheapest markets to be in, of course.
Um,
For software development, it's debatable what the cheaper markets are, but I think Pakistan would be in the running. Certainly, some countries in Northern Africa. These days, if you can get into Russia, that's a very affordable market. Belarus, places like that. But for us, we're looking at we want a good, talented labor force that we can afford, but not like bottom of the barrel, obviously. And that's the thing that we've really been happy with. Is I say the best engineer in the U.S. or let's put it even this way, like a lower level engineer at Google is not likely to come work for me, and I probably can't afford them. I think we honestly believe in some cases that we would decommission a lot of software platforms because we love this market that hasn't really transitioned to the cloud as like a bolt-on or tuck-in market because we're just more than happy to say, hey, guess what, guys? We're taking on your existing contract in 3 months. We need you to transfer to the new platform. We'll build all the data transfer tools. So it really is like sunsetting a platform. But we like that market because those guys they can't get SaaS multiples, and a lot of times they're older. They're trying to move the business to a new home. You'd be amazed how many of these guys actually make sure their customers get taken care of is much more important than the money. Yeah, and there's a sequencing problem we see a lot. I mean, I know that you're not trying to get to this at the end of the conversation, but it's just fascinating to think that even if a firm, say an insurance firm, we see this a lot with law firms too, got online in the 90s, like maybe they were ahead of the game. Turns out they're probably aging out of the system now too. There is a cycle with this kind of thing. So there's more to do. I mean, if you're a young person today is trying to figure out what to do with your life, stay somewhat close to technology, and I definitely recommend the cybersecurity route. I think I'm actually telling my son to do that if he wants to do some kind of IT or software related field. I'm like, cybersecurity is going to be in a golden age for 30 years, as far as I can tell.